so this is our very last chapter, and we're going to be talking about ecology, which is interactions between organisms and their environment. So we're going to start with some basic definitions, which you may recognize because we actually talked about some of this at the very beginning of the year in our very first lecture. So we've talked about levels like cell, tissue, organ, system, organism. Well, above the organism level, this is when we start getting into the ecology stuff. So a population is a group of a single species that mate with one another in an area. So remember, to be the same species, you have to be able to mate and make fertile offspring. So you could have a population of swans, and a population of ducks, a population of perch, a population of sharks, a population of penicillium fungus. It could be any organism, but living in a particular area, and it's a single species. A community would be all the living things in the area, just the living things. So this would include, if it was a pond community, this might include the perch and the ducks and the grass and the fungi, all the living things in the area. An ecosystem is the community plus the abiotic factors. So it's the same as the community, but now we're going to also include in that pond community the soil, the water, all the minerals, anything that's non-living, that's also part of that area. And putting the A in front here, abiotic, it means without, so non-living or without life. And finally, the biosphere, which is just a general word for all the living space on the planet. So this would be the most general, everything would be part of the same biosphere, but then within the biosphere, we have ecosystems. Within an ecosystem, we have communities. Within the community, we have several populations. All right, some things that would affect the ecology of a particular environment. Sometimes we have environments like biomes, like the desert biome or the tropical rainforest, where certain kinds of living things are supported based on the climate, the rainfall, things like that. So abiotic factors are the non-living physical and chemical attributes of the environment that could affect what can live there. The temperature, the sunlight. Obviously, the things that can live in a desert are probably not going to be the same organisms that can live in a tropical rainforest. And then biotic factors. This is the effect of the organisms on the environment as well. So yes, the temperature and the amount of rain is going to determine what can live there, but so is the amount of different kinds of organisms, like predation. If you're looking at an area where there's a lot of predators of a particular kind of prey, maybe a particular organism doesn't survive very well there because the predators will eat it. Disease can also be something that's a biotic factor, because when it gets very crowded, it's more likely that organisms can pass diseases around that and they spread much faster. That's why in cities, if there's an outbreak of something, it's typically going to spread a lot faster than in a rural community. It's the same concept. So abiotic and biotic factors both affect what kinds of organisms can live in an area, how crowded that area might be, what kind of life can be sustained there. Okay, any kind of environment, species are going to have relationships with one another. So there's several different kinds. These are actually not all of them, but these are the main ones. You've probably heard of these before. So symbiosis is a general word for relationships. A relationship where both organisms benefit is called mutualism. So like the clownfish and the sea anemone from, Nemo, you may remember. This is where they protect one another, or they each get some kind of a benefit from the relationship. And I'll give you an example on the next slide. Parasitism, I know you've heard of this. This is where one benefits and one's harmed. So like ticks and fleas are parasites. Tapeworms are parasites. They typically don't kill the organism, at least not quickly, because then they wouldn't have a host. So it's not like a predator where it kills the organism and eats it, but instead it kind of lives off of it. So it's benefiting and the host is harmed. Commensalism is where one organism benefits and the other one is unaffected. To me, this one is kind of hard to prove, because how do you really know the other organism is not affected in any way? But that's called commensalism. And then there's also competition. Keep that in mind. And we can subdivide that into two different groups. Inter means between. So like interstate trade would be between, say, Florida and Georgia. So inter-specific competition is between different species. So you might have, say, wolves and coyotes, and they're both fighting over the same resources. They both want to eat the same prey. That would be interspecific competition, and maybe one of them outcompetes the other, and that one goes extinct in that area. Intraspecific also exists, though. Even within a species, there's going to be competition. That's part of natural selection. So if you have a population of wolves, there's probably not enough food and mates and shelters and all those things to go around, and that's going to cause intraspecific competition, where some are going to survive and pass on their genes, and others are going to get outcompeted, and they're not going to live as long or have as many offspring. And so both of these contribute to the structure of a particular ecosystem. These are some examples of the relationships. So on the top left, you see this is called a lichen. That's how that's pronounced. This is an example of mutualism. These grow on trees. It's a fungus and an algae living together. The algae can perform photosynthesis. The fungus provides structure. And so they both benefit from the relationship. On the top right, this is supposed to be a whale, and these are barnacles. And at least according to the textbook, the barnacles do not affect the whale. Seems to me it would not be happy having the barnacles on it, but supposedly the barnacles benefit because they're filter feeders and they have a place to live, and they're going to be, filtering the water as the whale swims, but the whale it doesn't even know they're there. And this last one is an example of parasitism. A lot of parasites need multiple hosts for their life cycle. In the case of these zombie snails, the snails, when they get infected by eating the eggs from bird poop. And then those eggs hatch and become larvae, and the larvae go into the tentacles and make their tentacles swell up like that. And that makes the tentacles really visible to birds. So then the larvae get eaten by the bird, because they'll bite off the tentacles. Now the larvae develop into the adult, it lays eggs, and the cycle repeats. So this is parasitism because the parasite obviously benefits from this, but the snail is going to be harmed. In order for organisms to survive, they typically need, especially if they live in groups, they need to cooperate with one another and communicate with one another. And this would improve the fitness of that species. So keep in mind that fitness has nothing to do with being strong. We think of fitness, we usually think of physical fitness. But what we're talking about here is fitness as in reproductive success. We would say, in an evolutionary sense, that an organism that has the highest fitness is the one that has the most babies, because that means it's passed its genes on to the next generation. And so some examples of ways that organisms can communicate with one another. One is pheromones. Pheromones are chemicals that are released. They could send a signal to attack, like killer bees, or it could send a signal like a mating signal. Cats in heat will send out pheromones. You can't smell them, but the male cats can, and they know that it's time to mate. Quorum sensing is a specific example. In bacteria, they can actually sense when others in the group are close by, and they can send these signals to produce biofilms. And biofilms can then protect the bacteria from predators or competitors. Tactile refers to touch. A good example of that is bees. So the way that bees tell other bees in a hive where the food is, when they find food, they come back to the hive and they do this dance called a waggle dance. And the other bees actually feel them doing this dance, and the angle of the dance and the number of waggles, it basically tells the other bees where the food source is, how far away, and it's in reference to the sun. I'll attach a video of this so that you can watch it if you want to, so you can see how they do this. But it's actually a very interesting way of communicating, and they can tell where the food is, and then the other bees will go to the same flowers and collect more nectar. Obviously visual, I know that some animals showing the teeth is actually a sign of aggression, like dogs. You think about when a dog growls and it shows its teeth. It's trying to scare you off without actually fighting, because that's going to possibly get it injured. So this other picture I have up here of this wolf, that bowing behavior usually indicates submission or that it wants to play. Dogs do the same thing. Acoustical signals, this would be sound. So, for example, prairie dogs will have a scout that's looking for predators, and it will call out and send an alarm when there's a predator in the area. And so that's an acoustical signal. And speaking of that, this particular prairie dog that's sending that signal, that's the one that's going to be in the most danger, because when the hawk is coming, the others are going to run, and he's standing there sending out the signal. Which brings us to this next thing, which is called altruistic behavior. So it turns out altruistic behavior is sort of self-sacrifice. They jumped in front of the moving train to protect their child. But in the animal kingdom, something that we've discovered is that when animals perform these altruistic behaviors, like the prairie dog sacrificing itself to call out the alarm, it's all about what's called inclusive fitness. In other words, it's always going to be groups of animals that share a lot of genes with one another. Brothers, sisters. In the case of bees, I believe the worker bees share like over 50% of their genes with one another. So when they help each other out, even if they end up dying in the process, they're actually helping to pass their own genes on because they have genes in common. So we've seen this where a bird will raise their sister's eggs because they didn't have a nest this year, so that might improve the chances of some of their genes getting passed on through the relative. Again, the thing with prairie dogs, calling out, they're always going to be family situations. Meerkats also have a similar situation. I believe mole rats, I think, may also have a situation like that. Social living in groups can also be protective. A lot of times you'll see like antelope, and they protect the babies from predators. They may help with the young, live in this big social group. That's the benefit. The drawback is, again, anytime it's more crowded, you're going to have an increase in disease because it spreads more quickly. And you're going to have competition for food and mates and things like that. You're also going to have a buildup of waste in that area. Some factors that limit growth, density-dependent factors, are factors that only come into play when it gets crowded. So competition for food. If there's only a few individuals and a lot of land, that's not going to be a problem. But the more crowded it gets, now it's a problem. So these are factors that only come into play when the population gets big. Food, shelter, mates, waste accumulation. Density-independent factors are things that could also affect a population, but it has nothing to do with it being crowded. In other words, we don't have a flood because there were too many moose, right? But the flood might kill the moose nonetheless. So density-independent factors are typically things that can affect a population, but have nothing to do with the population's size itself. So I have two examples. As fish accumulate in your tank, ammonia builds up. That's their waste product. That's going to be a density-dependent factor. It's only going to build up if there's too many fish. This is a density-independent. You spray for bugs. Some of the pesticide gets into the tank water and the fish die. Some of the fish die. That's a density-independent factor. It just happened. These are just some tactics for survival. Cryptic coloration or camouflage. I know everybody's familiar with what camouflage is. Also bright colors. A lot of times colors like black and yellow stripes or the frogs with their bright colors, the poison dart frogs, they indicate that they're a dangerous animal and others will stay away, and that protects them. Mimicry is when a harmless creature, there's different kinds, but it's mainly when a harmless species looks dangerous and that protects it. So this is a hawk moth larva. It looks like a snake. A lot of times butterflies have big circles on their wings. It looks like eyes of some other kind of organism. This is a venomous snake. These caterpillars, they live on oleander. Technically they are poisonous, but they look like they'd sting you and they don't. So bright colors, things like that, they may make an organism look harmful when it's not really harmful. All right, exotic species. So this is important. Now, an exotic or invasive species is not invasive everywhere. It has an environment where it's supposed to live. Like iguanas are not native to Florida. That's not where they're supposed to be. In their normal environment, they're fine. But in Florida, the Burmese pythons and the iguanas and some of these displaced species, what makes something an exotic species is it can grow and reproduce easily and tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions. Please make sure you know that. Anytime they mention that in a question on the exam, and they talk about some kind of a species that it has no predators in this particular environment, and wow, it can survive a wide range of conditions, that's going to make it an invasive species in that area because it's probably going to outcompete the native species, which means it's going to throw off the ecosystem. It might cause another species to go extinct. These are some examples of invasive species in Florida. These wild hogs, the Burmese pythons, lionfish, the iguanas, etc.